There are very few lenses on the market that are genuinely unique, lenses that are just one of a kind. And the lens I'm reviewing today is definitely one of them. This here is the brand new Sigma 300 to 600mm f4 DG OS sports lens. And as you can imagine, there's a lot to talk about in this review. And I'm going to start right now. Now, this lens made a pretty big stir back when it was announced in February of 2025. Really did steal the show at the UK photography show this year in March. For the main reason is, well, it's one of a kind. There's not another lens like it. Sure, you get 400, 500 and 600mm prime lenses with a bright aperture of f4, but you definitely don't get an f4 lens with a zoom range like this from 300 to 600mm. But the main reason a lot of people are interested is because of its price point, it being around half the price of the Sony, Canon and Nikon equivalent lenses. The Nikon and Canon lens being around £14,000 brand new, where this lens here sits around just under £6,000, so a significant saving. Still very expensive, but if you are in the market to buy a super telephoto lens like this, is this one worth a spot in your camera bag? And is it really worth investing £6,000 in a third-party lens like this? Well, to find that out, I headed to the most northerly town in the world on an Arctic expedition to really test this lens out. Svalbard.
Oslo B37. Let's go.
Sounded like a good idea, bringing a giant 300 to 600mm f4 on a flight. I always forget the carrying bit between the airport and the actual plane itself. This is very heavy. So this behemoth of a lens is made of a full metal construction with a metal lens mount, and as you can imagine, it has incredible weather sealing designed to work in the most extreme of conditions. In fact, I would say the actual construction of this lens is the best I've ever seen from Sigma, and on par, if not better, than some of the first-party lenses that I've reviewed on this channel from Sony and Canon. Now, this lens comes in two mount types. You've got Sony E-mount, which is probably going to be the more popular lens type, but you also get it in Leica L-mount, which is the one that I'm going to be using in today's review with my Leica SL2. This is also Sigma's very first white lens, breaking from the tradition of only making black telephoto lenses, as well as Sigma have had a recent redesign with a slight brand update to their logo and typeface, and you can see this on this lens, and I actually quite like it. Now, this lens has a ton of buttons and switches to allow you to customize it depending on how you like shooting. Right at the front, you've got an autofocus to manual focus switch. Then right under that, you've also got a focus limiter switch with an image stabilization switch with two different modes. One for general use and one for panning and tracking. Great if you're a motorsports photographer, for example. Then underneath that, you've got a custom switch. And then on the other side of the lens, you've also got a focus preset switch as well as a button. And then right at the front of the lens, you've also got a focus actuator. This allows you to always focus to a set point and then reset it. Great if you're always focusing on a subject that's roughly the same distance away from you. Great if you're a sports photographer. You've also got a very large focus ring, which is electronically coupled to the focus motor, although you can use it in full-time manual focus. And then you've got your zoom ring. Now, what I really like about this lens is it's internally zooming and internally focusing. So the weight distribution doesn't change when you zoom from 300 to 600mm. As well as the zoom throw isn't very large. That's the distance between 300 to 600mm. As you can see on the lens, you can pretty much do it in one hand hold, 300, 600. So it's really easy to zoom in and out from its minimum to its maximum, which is really helpful, especially if you're a wildlife photographer focusing on smaller objects. And I found this incredibly helpful, even with gloves on, in Svalbard. Walruses to our 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I thought that might.
It all happens all suddenly so very, very quickly. One of the guests in front, literally, I guess they've got binoculars, spotted them. And luckily, because I've got more resolution on this camera, I can zoom in a little bit. But there's some walruses just over there. Everything happens so quickly here, but yeah. just in case I drop the camera in the water. There's no getting it back. I actually had a nightmare last night that I did that. So I brought the strap here just so that doesn't happen. Now, because of this lens's unique focal length and aperture, it does have quite a complicated optical formula, with 28 elements in 21 groups, making this lens very big and very heavy, coming in at just under 4 kilograms at 3.97 kilos, and that is a whopping 8.75 pounds, being around 25% heavier than the equivalent Sony 600mm f4 lens. That lens there comes in at just over 3 kilograms, which, to be honest with you, you can definitely feel in your hands. Trying to handhold this lens, which is what I did on the rib boat, it definitely was a challenge. You still definitely can do it, but your arms are definitely going to be tired afterwards. So I would recommend using this lens on a tripod, or at least don't handhold it for too long of a period, unless obviously you've got arms like Jared Polin. But if we have a look at the size chart here, you can see that it's not actually that much larger than a 600mm f4. So yes, it's heavier, but it isn't necessarily larger, taking up roughly the same amount of room that a normal 600mm f4 would do inside your camera bag. Now, because of this lens's giant front element, you obviously can't use standard filters. So what Sigma have done is they've come up with a really nice 40.5mm drop-in filter at the rear of the lens. So if you're planning on wanting to use this lens for video, for example, and you want to get yourself a neutral density filter for it, all you'll need to do is buy the 40.5mm filters at the rear of the lens. And those filters are quite affordable. This lens also comes with a giant lens hood, which is designed to protect the front element, and it's also rubberized at the front, and you've also got this really nice tripod collar with a few unique features that I wish other brands would add. The first feature is it's got an Arca-Swiss compatible plate on the front of it, so if you do use a tripod that's Arca-Swiss compatible, you won't need to get a tripod plate for it, as it's built into the tripod collar, as well as it has 90-degree clicks, which is super helpful when you want to switch from landscape to portrait orientation on a tripod. But the unique feature is found just at the back. You can actually switch that off. You've got a little toggle switch here, which allows you to switch the clicks on or off. So depending on if you like that feature or not, you've got that option at the back, which I have never seen on a lens like this before. It also comes with a super helpful bag that actually has been really well designed. It easily has enough room to fit the lens with a camera on the top, plus it's got a waterproof shell that comes with it, and it's also got more room for accessories like tripods and other things. So if you are planning on shooting with a camera, lens and tripod, it all fits in the bag that comes provided with the lens for free. And I really like that Sigma have gone to the attention to detail to make a camera bag that's actually useful with the lens that they make. Now, of course, the main reason why you'd want to invest in a lens like this is going to be its focal length and aperture. 300 to 600mm is a very useful focal length for such a wide variety of different types of wildlife and sports photography. Now, I mainly focused on larger mammals, at least Arctic mammals like walruses, polar bears, as well as aquatic mammals like seals and whales. But of course, you can focus on a variety of other different types of photography. Like, for example, if you're doing smaller mammals, maybe birds, for example, or maybe you're photographing squirrels, this would be a very useful focal length for that. 300mm allows you to add a little bit more of your environment in, where 600mm allows you to really focus on the actual subject themselves. Very useful focal length. But what's great about this lens is you don't have to compromise on the aperture, having a consistent bright aperture of f4 all the way through its focal range, making it great for really separating your subjects at 600mm, but also making it really good in a low light environment as well. Maybe you're shooting at nighttime, maybe you're a football or soccer photographer, then this is going to be a super helpful lens for it, thanks to its nice bright aperture of f4. This lens is also really sharp as well. Center sharpness was absolutely exquisite. If I go ahead and zoom in on this image here, you can really see the detail, and I don't think many other lenses would be able to offer you this resolution at this focal length. Genuinely amazing. But let's have a quick look at a few graph images. Now let's go ahead and zoom in at 300mm first, wide open at f4. We can see we're getting really good center sharpness, absolutely pin sharp, and we're also getting really good sharpness in the center as well. Not as good as the center, but still very good with a high amount of resolution and contrast. Now we can really improve that by stepping down to f5.6, f8, and then f11. And if you go ahead and go for its narrowest aperture, f22, the image does start to soften up. So let's go ahead and zoom in at 600mm. Again, wide open at f4. We're getting really good center sharpness, and the corner image sharpness is definitely still there, but you're not getting as much resolution as the center. Now we can improve that by stepping down to f5.6 and then f8, where this lens really is razor sharp, but it does start to soften up around f11, and again at its narrowest aperture, f22, the image is definitely softer versus at f8. So this lens has a razor sharp image quality. But the question I got asked a lot whilst I was on my trip is, how does it compare resolution-wise or sharpness-wise to a 600mm prime lens? Well, so I can compare it to the 600mm prime lens that Canon sell, and I would say this lens is around 95% as sharp as the Canon lens. Now I do think the Canon lens is just a little bit sharper, but obviously you don't get the zoom lens, which really shows you how well designed this lens is. It is incredibly sharp and almost as sharp as a prime lens, whilst it's still being very versatile as a zoom. Flaring is also quite good with this lens as well, although it is very difficult to make a lens like this flare just due to the very narrow field of view. But if you do point it towards any bright lights, like for example the sun, you will notice a significant drop in contrast, as well as a few flaring artifacts to appear in your photo. But to reduce that as much as possible, highly recommend using the lens hood that you get inside the box. Distortion and vignetting is also something really good. Now, annoyingly, I don't have the lens profile for this lens, so all of the photos and videos that you see in this review are profile corrections turned off, simply because I currently don't have the lens profile on my Lightroom catalog, so that's something to bear in mind. Now, the distortion vignetting aspect of this lens is really flat. It has a very flat profile with very low vignetting, both at 300 and 600mm. Now, you can remove vignetting completely if you step down by 2 stops all the way to f8, but actually it has a very flat profile that's easy to fix without having the profiles actually enabled. So yeah, this lens is really good when it comes to distortion and vignetting. And lastly, macro performance. And this lens definitely is not sold as a macro lens, with a minimum focus distance of just 2.8 meters with a maximum reproduction ratio of 0.16, which isn't very good. But as it's not sold as a macro lens, and to be honest with you, people buying this lens are probably not interested in minimum focus distance anyway, I don't really think it's a major factor to contender. When I was on Svalbard and photographing polar bears and walruses, I definitely wanted them more than 2.8 meters away. Otherwise, I probably wouldn't be here to make this review. Now, something to bear in mind when owning a third-party lens like this, and you own a Sony camera specifically, as this sold in Sony E-mount, you need to bear in mind about the frames per second limitation that Sony apply to third-party lenses, which is the only negative of owning a lens like this. Nothing to do with the lens, it's all to do with the Sony manufacturer. You see, if you own a third-party lens, you're limited to just 15 frames a second on your Sony camera. You're not limited if you buy the 600mm f4 from Sony. You can shoot all the way up to 120 frames a second if you own the A9 III. But annoyingly, this lens here, 15 frames a second is all you can get. Nothing to do with the lens, it's all to do with Sony. But if you do own the L-mount version, you can shoot all the way up to 24 frames a second, which is what I got from my Leica SL2. Another thing to think about when you're buying a third-party lens of this price point is going to be the autofocus and image stabilization performance. But I genuinely think you haven't got to worry in both regards when it comes to this lens here. The autofocus was absolutely exceptional. I pretty much nailed focus every single time. Now, if I owned an E-mount version of this lens and tried it with a Sony camera, I can imagine it being even better. But it's got nothing to do with the lens itself, it's more to do with the camera choice I had when I took it to Svalbard. You see, the Leica SL2 uses a contrast-based autofocus system, which is a little bit of an older technology now. Not too many cameras actually use it. So the autofocus system in this camera didn't perform as good as the lens could provide. I definitely think the lens offered a faster autofocus system than the camera could offer. So if you do want the fastest, I'd probably recommend the E-mount version and buying a Sony camera. But of course, I still got really fast autofocus and really good image stabilization. Luckily, the SL2 does come with image stabilization, and at 600mm, that's very helpful, especially with the optical stabilization of this lens. Again, I was moving around on the rib boat, bouncing up and down with the waves, and I was still able to get the photos that I was after, and that's all thanks to the image stabilization. So the autofocus and image stabilization of this lens were absolutely exceptional and exactly what you'd expect of a lens of this price point. But I think if you owned a Sony, or at least if I had the E-mount version and a Sony camera, it'd probably perform even better. But that's down to the camera and not the lens. What's that over there? I just spotted something. Was that a whale? So, in conclusion, Well, with an overall score of 40 out of 50, this is a highly recommended lens to have in your camera bag. And if you're after a lens with this bright aperture and a versatile zoom, this lens here is definitely worth a spot in your camera bag and highly worth investing in 2025. And I would say this lens here is the best wildlife lens currently on the market. But of course, write down in the comments below, what do you think? Would you prefer a 600mm prime or a 300 to 600mm f4? Write it down in the comments below. Thank you to all my YouTube members that are currently supporting the channel. If you guys want to support the channel and get some awesome perks, including free Lightroom presets like the ones that you can see on screen, make sure to go ahead to the link in the description. I've been James for Photo Fever, and I'll catch you guys when I get back from Svalbard next week.